Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. If I had a happy meter, I would show you that I'm really happy right now. So thanks to Science and Technology for bringing us all here in person. And speaking of science and technology, the Kendall Square Innovation Ecosystem. So this panel discussion will be about, our panelists here will provide some insight on how best to engage with the innovation ecosystem here at MIT, and in general, and then the ILP memberships in specific. Now, just to keep this talk lively, I encourage you to please add your questions to the pigeonhole that you'll get a QR code on the screen soon. And I would like to introduce my panelists here. So we've got Professor Tim Swager, John MacArthur Professor of Chemistry. Remotely, we have Steve Whittaker, Head of Strategic U.S. University Research Partners at BT, Jean-Francois Morizur, Vice President of Science and Technology of Imerys, and my colleague, Imerys, I have to say Minerals Americas, and Randall Wright, my colleague. And let's start with you, Randall. So I know Randall is always right. Okay. Mr. Wright is always right. So with over 30 years of experience advising senior executives, he advised senior executives of Fortune 500, FTSE 100 firms on innovating with MIT. Several articles you've published in MIT Sloan Management Review, MIT Technology Review, and Research Technology Management. So he also, I have to say, he was awarded the Decoration for Service of the Representative of Austria in gold for his outstanding contribution to the development of the relationship between Austria and MIT. So that's fantastic. You've got a considerable amount of experience, as we all know, between managing the partnerships and the interface between MIT and companies in the US and Europe, and senior administration here and faculty at MIT. Can you tell us, and just to give context to our live audience and live stream audience, what exactly is ILP?
Okay, the Industrial Liaison Program, I think Carl had mentioned and spoke to, but I'll explain it this way. MIT basically does three things. It teaches state-of-the-art coursework. It does groundbreaking research, but the thing that puts it all together is what I'm going to call discovery, which is really entering the discourse on the campus. That's the key thing, and that is what the Industrial Liaison Program does, is it puts people into the discourse so they can learn about innovations, so that they can make better decisions, and so that they can have a vision for the future and work with the faculty members here in sponsored research activities. So every member of the Liaison Program, Carl had mentioned there are over 260, works with a program director. That program director is someone who in most cases is graduated from MIT, probably has an advanced degree from MIT. And that program director's role is to advise, counsel, and direct the investigation that the company makes of MIT. Now, the key thing that people don't mention that really makes this work and really makes the ILP the gold standard of industrial university relationships is the portfolio management process. What that means is that every member is a part of a small portfolio that is managed by the program director. And what that means is the program director sees more than any individual company would see by themselves. And that means that as they're involved in every meeting that a company will have at MIT, they'll see something or hear something that the company itself may not actually look for. And so there are many connections we've made for companies that were the ones that were really unexpected that proved to be very beneficial. So in a nutshell, that's what the program is about, is putting companies into the discourse on the campus.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that brief. I mean, we can go on and on about ILP, but that's really great. Let's turn to industry. Imerys is a new ILP member. So let's get that perspective. Now, Jean-Francois has worked for Imerys for 4 years, and leading Performance Minerals Americas R&D team that focuses on developing high-performance mineral solutions for a wide range of markets, and including building and construction and rubber and plastics. Jean-Francois holds a PhD in polymer science and engineering from University of Southern Mississippi and has 15 years of experience in R&D in areas of high performance engineered thermoplastics and minerals. Now, Jean-Francois, if I were to say, and we mentioned this several times earlier, when we think about MIT Kendall Innovation Ecosystem, we think of biotech, right? So Imerys is a French multinational company that basically is focused on processing minerals and industrial minerals. And your CEO, Alessandro Daza, has said that he wants Imerys to be known as an innovative company driven by innovation. So if I were to ask you, what brings a company like Imerys right here at MIT?
Thank you, Katrina. And I wanted actually to take some time just thanking also Randall, MIT, and the ILP, the new program that we are part in, for the invitation to participate to this panel. So let me tell you a little bit about innovation at Imerys. This is a global organization present in 40 countries, 16,000 individuals. And we do have a globalized network in terms of innovations across the globe. And we rely first and foremost on the competencies, the expertise for scientists and all the other functions that support innovation in our group. Mm-hmm. We rely also a lot on external innovation. And external innovation can actually be looking at project support from time to time. We do actually have a wide network of universities, institutes across the globe that provide that support and that insight on task basis, project basis, really focused on areas that Imerys is interested in. So now, what brings me and what brings us to MIT and the ILP? I think that MIT and the ILP provides a very different perspective in terms of external innovation. This perspective is looking at defining, leading, driving some of the technology trends that have made MIT very famous in terms of innovation management. So we are looking at bringing that insight within the organization and increase or develop, I would say, the acuity that was actually discussed earlier today in terms of assimilating the information that would in turn drive disruptive innovation in the group. So the track record at MIT speaks for itself. Numbers actually were shown this morning, which why we are here, and also the fact that it's a global network that we have access to. I've been also very well engaged from the start, a couple of months ago, here in the Americas, but also in Europe, where we had recently a recent conference in Paris on the topic.
The Paris Symposium, yeah. And don't get me wrong, we're very happy that you're here. All right, so let's turn to Steve, who's joining us remotely. Wherever you are, Steve, hello. So Steve is a computer scientist and engineer. He's got almost 40 years of research experience. He's a senior manager in British Telecom, BT, applied research organization, and is responsible for the relationships between BT and the partnerships at MIT here for the last 20 years. So I'm going to read this because this is something that was something you said. So BT has a very active and very robust internal research capability coupled with a long-standing open innovation strategy. So this is something we know from you, Steve. Now, the core part of this relationship with universities like MIT, BT and MIT have been collaborating for almost 30 years or more, Steve, and the ongoing conversations between BT and MIT researchers have been an integral facet of this enduring partnership, and this is in your words. Now, BT was not a member of the MIT ILP before, and this is something interesting because it brings me to the question, like, why did you decide to become an MIT ILP member, having worked with MIT for several years?
So thank you. So first, I feel really guilty for not being able to be with you today. It's a bit like a small boy not able to join his friends for a birthday party or something. So, but just to answer the question, so prior to about 2000, we had what are classes like point relationships with faculty across campus. So, for example, with the Sloan School and with the Media Lab and a couple of other places. And if you remember 2000, it's a very similar moment to today. Today we have the AI moment. In 2000, we had the kind of digital moment when there was a massive amount of transformation going on. So we really saw the opportunity to kind of move from a series of point relationships to something that was a like more rounded, more strategic kind of program. And joining ILP gave us the opportunity to kind of start to look more broadly across campus and also to build out kind of friendships and relationships and conversations into the broader ecosystem. So that's worked really exceptionally well for us over that period. I think one of the things it's done is enabled us to service kind of a wider set of stakeholders in the organization over a longer time period. As new issues come up, we need to be able to kind of talk to people about different types of things, but also take a longer view over things. So, so for example, one of the things we've been very interested in is this whole question about managing innovation and managing innovation partnerships. And so it's been really great to work with, particularly as people mentioned this morning, MIT is really a center of thinking and research about the act of doing innovation. So that's been really powerful for us. But over that time, for example, we've done a lot of work, working with things like the federal labs locally, the startups locally, working with different labs. So as a new issue comes up, ILP has been fantastic about kind of saying, you should really chat to these guys because they're doing something we think will be a way of looking at your problems, and that's been great. So I think what we have found is there are lots and lots of different ways of having kind of value creating conversations and activities between a company like ourselves and MIT. And one of the things ILP does is enables us to kind of explore the space of interesting things to do together. And those interesting things change over time as the opportunities change, as the requirements change. But having a stable and taking a partnership and thinking about it as a portfolio has really worked very well for us. I think one of the things is that it meshes very well with the way that we think about ourselves as an organization. So we're a technologically intense business. We have been since like the 1880s, going through the Second World War, for example. So it made sense for us to have a strong relationship hub through our research department, but then with the responsibility to help to engage the rest of the business in lots of different ways with lots of the different types of activities that are going on around campus. So a combination of a kind of portfolio approach, we're taking, as Michael's talked about, this kind of absorptive capacity and thinking about that absorptive capacity as MIT changes, as we change, has been really, really fantastic for us. I think we've learned a lot. We've done a lot of really impactful things. We've done a lot of interesting things. We've done things we wouldn't have done if we'd been still working with this kind of series of point relationships.
Thank you so much, and I'm glad you mentioned absorptive capacity because we'll go back to that, quoting Michael Davies. So let's now turn to our fabulous faculty, Professor Swager. With more than 500 peer-reviewed publications, more than 100 patents, and numerous honors, including the Linus Pauling Award in Chemistry that you received in 2016. You made pioneering contributions in the fields of chemistry, material science, and polymer science. And you're also the director of the Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation. Can you tell us, what role do the conversations with business and corporate executives, what role do they play in your research efforts?
Okay. Yeah, well, first, I'd like to say I'm really delighted to be part of this conversation because ILP is really makes MIT special for me and the engagement with companies just in general. And to put that in perspective, as academics, we often measure our stature and output through publications, not always so much as patents, but it's becoming more and more so. But we're trying to push, fundamental concepts, in my case, chemistry, physics, engineering, forward. And those concepts are really somewhat irrelevant if they don't have the context and how they're going to be used or change the world. And so having industry really engage with us and come around and have dialogues about what's needed, where are the pain points. And I've been enlightened many times by talking with people about that come in and have a niche business that I wasn't really aware of, that's something that existed and what their pain points are, and thinking about how, why are they talking to me? And then it usually comes out that there's something I just had no idea, that there was a really unique application that could be out there. Sometimes industry comes looking, MIT is a crystal ball too, that like understanding, disruptive patterns, what's in the pipeline coming down from, new inventions and how might it impact them. And that's also fun to think about, and how we can engage in that. And so there are many ways that industry's influenced me. Sometimes I'll have a good idea. Sometimes they'll plant this seed, this engagement, this dialogue we get, it will plant a seed. And, a year later, or sometimes in my case, even times where we haven't really been able to connect with something that really worked, but then in a startup company down the road, we came up with an invention. I say, I know who to call that was going to be interested in this invention. And it was all through this engagement and knowing, and we've had some cases where there have been actually very, very tight relationships down the road that started all with just a discussion in my office. Many times, it's other people or other startups that we can connect. And I'm, benefit from having the privilege of being the Sponde director, so I see a lot of the projects that are coming through our faculty that are going out into the startup land. The Sponde Center is really a center that is to help facilitate this transition to the marketplace. And so many times I'll know a faculty member or I'll know a startup that we can connect. And that's really in MIT's DNA also, because we're a place that collaborates. Our buildings are designed to collaborate. They're all fused together. We're like the world's biggest high school. Sometimes I say, we're all one big building. You don't know when you're going from one department to the next, and the departments are interdigitated. And so that's just in our culture, and it's in our culture to also engage with industry and learn together and benefit from our collective vision. So industry's been really kind of a North Star in some sense in my research and guiding how we translate our scientific studies to something that can have impact.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that insight. I actually, because you mentioned startups, and I mentioned you mentioning a deep bench the other day, and then you said that MIT, that basically extends to startups in general, which brings me to Randall. I just want you, can you briefly just mention MIT Startup Exchange? I know that Carl had mentioned that briefly this morning, and then we have Marcus Doloff, the program director of MIT Startup Exchange. Can you just tell us briefly about it?
Sure. Startup Exchange, I think as Carl had said, was started maybe 7 years ago. And what actually I think its genesis was that we realized that one of the great things that MIT did do was have people who were very entrepreneurial and start companies, and we would feature them in different lunchtime conferences. And so it came together that there should be a database of startup companies that are MIT related, founded by MIT alumni or faculty and staff, in some cases students. The good thing about this, and I think Marcus is going to tell you about this, is the quality of the startups is very, very high. And it's a curated database. There's the STEX 25, which are 25 firms that we see that have very interesting or promising technologies. So through their programs, you are able to learn about what they are doing, and also through your program director, if you want to speak with them, they can make that possible. So it's a really big plus of ILP to be able to have access to these really tremendous startups.
Thank you so much. And so Steve, getting back to you. You heard Professor J. Pop earlier talk about what's needed for a successful open innovation. I'd like to ask you about this. So in your experience, what missteps do companies make when they embark on open innovation in a community like this one, like the one in MIT, Kendall Square?
I think one of the things I would say is it's very hard to talk about missteps because I think companies have to make, you make the decisions you make under constraints and in a very dynamic environment. So some instances, you have to make bets about what you think the best way to act at a given time is. And sometimes those bets play out and sometimes they don't. So I think missteps can be a tricky way to think about things. But what I would say more generally is that the innovation is a contact sport. And one thing is that it's not something where you can just sign a check and go away and come back again. I think as several of the speakers earlier on commented, it was like engagement is the key part of that, and kind of opening up discussions that are not just necessarily about solving a short-term problem, but about more of the kind of long-term trajectories of technology, a science, an industry, a business function like HR or like purchasing or like IT, and having the conversations around that. And I think many of the most interesting conversations that we've had have not been people that are not like us or not like me. So I think learning the vocabularies of from economists and from the political scientists and from the historians and applying them to the way that you think about your sectors of technology, the design of processes, the internal transformations. So I think that the biggest suggestion I make for people is to think beyond the contracts. Don't think about these as kind of transactional relationships around a particular, and there are good reasons. Some people might say, well, we want a particular technology to solve a problem, but to take the opportunity to use them more broadly, to look for the other interesting things that you and MIT or individual faculty members might want to do together. Opportunities for students, opportunities to have a broader debate with executives about the trajectories that a technology area of science are moving in. And I think that the thing I suggest trying to avoid is thinking too narrowly about what you care about. And you've got to have focus, but I think there are so many interesting types of things. We've done things like we've run conferences together, we've hired people, we've done internships, we've kind of exposed people from decision makers, from regulators, the faculty, and backwards and forwards. So there's lots of interesting things that go beyond just the development of one particular technology solution to something. So I think that the misstep will probably be to not think broadly enough and to not think beyond the contracts.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting insight. It's non-transactional. And Jean-Francois, would you agree with that? What do you see?
I totally agree. One of the key, I would say, or the most complex for us to approach with the ILP was to organize ourselves so that we can really recognize the value of the new information that we'll be exposed to.
Yeah.
And organizing ourselves in such a way that we can have that flow of information that goes across the organization, that again is global, very complex, multiple markets, dozens of different functions that all bear some, I would say, responsibility in the innovation process. Mm-hmm. I could not agree more. The fact that we need to define very well upfront the interface between ILP, MIT, and the company to be as successful as possible. So internalizing the information, mm-hmm. and making it relevant, but really listening to what the faculty members, the startup exchange, and some other actual players on campus will actually provide is actually crucial to the success of this.
Thank you. I don't know where time went. As someone sitting on the other end of this, what do you think, Professor?
So I think the most important thing is to not be afraid to plant really key seeds in this engagement and talking with faculty, and those seeds will grow and they'll create new opportunities for you, and if you can continue to be engaged, you'll be the first one to know when they blossom.
That's fabulous. And Randall, do you want to briefly comment on that as well before we jump on to the next?
Yeah, I'm going to say something that's similar to what Tim has said, but a little different. One of the things I think companies should realize is that it was pointed out many years ago by Arnoldo Hacks that information technology would change businesses and people would no longer be in industries, but they would be working in domains with complementars. What that means is a company has to look broadly at what's going on, because this is the case with digital technology. It's not something you can add to a business. It's something you have to have a capability and know about. So what you really want to, in part, be looking for are movements on the campus. What does that mean? RFID started at MIT. And I remember when it first started out, there were many people who couldn't understand what David Brock was actually talking about. But he wasn't the only person working on it. So were other people at MIT, but there were different schools of thought. What happens is somebody creates an invention, and this is what Peter Glor was saying, and it starts to go viral. And that's what you want, why you want to talk to the faculty members, is to see what is it that they're talking about. One of Professor Swager's colleagues, Vladimir Bulovic, had said, the hard thing to do at MIT as a faculty member is, he said, out of the 1,000 of things you could do, the one or two that would really matter. And that's why you want to talk to the faculty members, is to understand what they're doing and what problems they are identifying. Because the things like touchscreens, the early work was done at MIT on touchscreens. Now it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. So that's part of what you want to look for, is what problems do they see that they should solve? And what happens if it does go viral? Well, how are we going to respond? So those are just some thoughts, I think, of what you want to do when you explore.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I don't know where, again, 3 minutes. So I want to ask this question about, going back to Professor Davies' discussion to you, Jean-Francois. We heard Michael Davies speak to the need for a company to have absorptive capacity, right? To profit from the discourse on MIT's campus. So what advice would you have for an executive on building this capacity in their organization?
As I mentioned, I think that organizing the organization internally in such a way that you have a core team that we have actually developed across the globe, so that you have that direct connection between the program and the rest of the organization. Internal communication has to be adapted, definitely, so that we can touch the most diverse part of our organization, just to expose those insights and bring the fruits.
Yeah, thank you. So we do have a question, I see that here. What type of companies and industries have truly embraced open innovation? And what are key elements that makes open innovation successful? Who would like to answer that? Professor Swager, would you like to comment on that?
That's tricky for me to make comments about what kind of companies. I mean, I think companies that come to MIT and are embracing open innovation. Just, if you're a part of ILP, that's why you're here. And there are other companies that obviously that aren't part of our ecosystem that embrace open innovation. But if you're at MIT and you've joined the club and basically tapping into all the talent, and you're only seeing a fraction of it when you come, we have rate each bench, then you're really part of an open innovation culture, and you're embracing it. And beyond that, I don't really know what more to say today.
Yeah. And Steve and Jean-Francois from the industry, do you want to?
Well, so I was going to say, I think the thing about open innovation, to my mind, is that you have to put it in context with a lot of the other kind of increasing understanding we have about how innovation works. So, for example, if you look at work like Charlie Fine have done on industry restructuring, and the idea that industries move between vertical integration, horizontal integration, and back again, and there's this cycle going on. So you go through cycles of where the dominant companies in industries are doing all the work. They're building the low-level technology, they're building the platforms, they're building the applications, they're grabbing all the money. And then suddenly it flips. So you had DEC and IBM and Honeywell, and then you suddenly had Intel and Microsoft, and now you've got Google, and you've got... So I think as you think about the trajectory of an organization through those sorts of transformations, the idea that you're always going to have all the best ideas around every aspect of what you do up and down that stack seems a bit kind of, hubristic. So I think we've begun to understand where different aspects of open innovation strategy kind of feed into the organizational flexibility to be able to span horizontally and vertically as the industries change around you and there's opportunities to open up. So it's critical. I think all industries really face it. It's not something that's any industry is, can ignore, I think.
Yeah. Jean-Francois, I don't want to force you to answer that, but if you'd like to, please, by all means.
I think having an open mind, this is key. I was meeting 3-4 weeks ago with faculties on site, and being immersed in an environment that sees the world very differently to what we can see it internally within the company and also the industry. This is not only refreshing, this is actually very insightful and where actually the company wants to go. And the other thing is understanding the needs, where the company is, where's the organization going at, what are the priorities. And I think it was mentioned earlier today that coming with a good understanding of where do you want to go and what do you want to look at, I think is great. And finally, is being challenged by the ecosystem here at MIT that for me actually bears most value. Is trying to prove us wrong on some of the areas and processes and focus areas that we are actually looking at. And so listening again and internalizing so that we can better understand where the company would go.
Yeah, great. I mean, you also need the guidance here because, it's you can easily get lost around MIT. But actually, before my colleagues kill me, I just need to ask you, just to wrap this up, if you were to give advice to executives who are interested in engaging with MIT, the MIT Kendall Innovation Ecosystem, can I just go around you here and just, starting with Professor Swagger, what would you tell him or her?
So I think it's all about engagement. It's about being here. MIT has a really special place as being a convener of industry, academics. The talent in this region, of this Bay Area region of the United States, is just amazing. We're not the only university in town. There are other good ones. It's just we really have abundant resources, and getting and engaging and being kind of part of the club is really important.
Yeah, thank you. Jean-Francois?
Being engaged, I think, is core of being part of this program. Having the right organization again and the frequency, having routines that actually structure the interaction, I think is crucial. This is my second trip over the past 8 weeks, and I have my counterparts in Europe also making the trip in November, just to interact and hearing firsthand the information from the program. So I think engagement and also establishing some routines that build that continuum and the flow of information that would help the company understand what's next in terms of disruptive innovation.
Great, thank you. And Steve?
Yeah, I think the advice would be try it. Do it. Try some experiments. Try doing some different ways of working. Some of the different some projects that are not just about waiting for the product to come at the end, the project to finish at the end of the year. Try different engagements. Involve your graduates. Involve some of your HR people. Involve your finance people. And then I think the other thing to my mind is talk to people that are not like you. So if you're an engineering company, talk to the people in political science. If you're a biology company, talk to the people in MacEng, because those crossovers and those ways of getting vocabulary and applying them to problems, in a time of dramatic change, it's been really valuable for us. And I think that looking back over 40 years of doing this kind of stuff, you kind of feel, periods of dramatic change keep coming. It's a muscle, and it's kind of it takes a while to kind of build that internal capacity to use that muscle, at the different phases of those waves. So.
Thank you, Steve. And last but not least, Mr. Wright.
Well, I would say, just echoing what Michael Davies was saying, A strategic relationship with a university should mean that there are going to be advances here that will affect your business strategy. And so you need to have the input that goes back to the senior management. It doesn't work to have a open innovation group that's going to be like on a scavenger hunt. You want to be able to take that information back and get it back to the right people in the company who have to make decisions. Important thing to realize is that a lot of the developments that happen here, you have time to reflect on them before you have to immediately make a decision. That is true in many, many cases. For example, Polaroid might have been able to see that digital convergence was coming about if they had, let's have been open to that kind of thinking. And they would have had time to respond. So make it strategic. That means have the people who are making the investigation here get the information back to the right people in the company.
Thank you. Well, this wraps it up. I'm Katrina Khalil, by the way. I forgot to mention that at the very beginning. I'm a communications specialist at the ILP Corporate Relations. And if you have any questions, please get in touch with us later on today at the networking session or by email. Thank you to my panelists and everyone else. Thank you.
Okay.